This week on Brian Ross Investigates. Dark days and the scariest Halloween ever? A second and third wave of COVID-19 rolling through the country, just like 1918. Historians tell us we have failed to learn from the past.
We see lots of pushback, both at the personal level as well as the political level that we saw in 1918. The big difference is that pushback is now highly politicized. That was not the case in 1918.
Plus, the Apostles' handmaiden, one of the women alleged to have groomed and recruited young girls to perform sex acts to the leader of a huge international church, is now pleaded guilty in California court. We'll get the inside story from someone who was there.
They do it because they think it's the right thing to do, and you're pleasing him, and it's a blessing.
And this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with what the editors of Mediaite have to say about the TV anchor who likened the president to a crazy uncle.
That was a retweet. I'll put it out there. People can decide for themselves.
You're the president. You're not like someone's crazy uncle who can just retweet whatever.
That was
From the Law&Crime Trial Network, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our viewers on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always tonight by Rhonda Schwartz from the Law&Crime Network. And Rhonda, we begin with a major development in a story we've been following closely for more than a year. New charges involving the Apostle, a man by the name of Naasón Joaquín García, and one of his handmaiden. He's accused of recruiting and running a huge sex trafficking ring involving young girls from his own church in Southern California. Rhonda?
That's right, Brian. Alondra Ocampo is one of his inner circle, a sort of handmaiden accused of helping him recruit teenagers for sex. In a major development, she has pled guilty to 4 felony counts related to child sex abuse, and we're told she will likely testify against him in his upcoming trial. It's a potentially huge setback for his upcoming criminal defense.
Prosecutors say the apostle, for all his religious glory, has always had women in the church who helped to recruit and groom young girls in their teens for him to abuse and rape. Prosecutors say Alondra Ocampo was one of them. She was arrested with Garcia last year, and agents have testified extensively how young victims described Ocampo's role as one of the apostle's handmaidens.
Ocampo requested that Jane Doe number 1 send her nude photos of herself because the servant of God, who is defendant Garcia, would be really happy if they sent pictures not wearing any clothes or something similar to that.
Agents testified that the young girls were recruited from the Light of the World churches in the Southern California area, including this one in East Los Angeles, always invoking the apostle's status as Jesus on earth to get the girls to submit to his sexual whims.
Did Jane Doe 1 tell you whether defendant Ocampo suggested that Jane Doe 1 did not love God or the apostle if she did not comply with that request?
That is correct.
Agents testified that Ocampo would take the young girls to Victoria's Secret stores to buy scanty lingerie for them to wear as she filmed them for the apostle.
She was provided by Miss Ocampo, provided whipped cream, strawberries, lingerie, and the other girl, they would spray the whipped cream and strawberries on each other and lick them off. And she said that Miss Ocampo told her that the photos were for Mr. Garcia and that she would send them to him.
To get a better understanding of the import of all this, we're joined now by Sochil Martin and her lawyer, Deborah Mallgrave. Sochil, you were once in the orbit of the apostle, and you understand fully what Miss Ocampo has been through.
Yes, I do.
And can you understand how she would be able to recruit other young girls?
I do. I do, because I believe she was brainwashed. I do believe that. I believe all the girls were, because I was. I lived it. Nobody told me. Nobody said, hey, I think this is happening, or I have a picture to show you. I lived it. My entire life, I lived it. So it's not a he said, she said.
Given her plea, what does that tell you about what she did for the apostle?
The gravity of the harm that she committed against these girls are not something that she woke up one day and said that that's something she wanted to do. And this was all Naason's doing. And I'm happy. I'm happy she came forward. I'm happy she, you know, the truth shall set you free.
And from your experience, Garcia recruits women like this to recruit other women for him? That's what he asked you to do?
Exactly.
Let me ask your lawyer, Deborah Mallgrave, what do you think is the impact of this on the case against Naasón Garcia?
Well, I think it's definitely a good sign and incredibly helpful. And I think the guilty plea in her statements just go to show that one of the co-conspirators of Naasón Garcia believes that there's strong enough evidence out there to convince people beyond a reasonable doubt of the charges that have been alleged against them. And I believe that significance in that fact cannot be lost upon defendants or others that are out there who have been conspiring with Naasón Garcia for these crimes.
As you know, Garcia's lawyers pointed a finger at your client, Sochil Martin, when she first came forward, claiming in court papers that she was as responsible as he was. I assume they'll try to do the same thing with Ocampo.
And I assume so as well. And I think all that just goes to show you that how hard it is to resist being in Naasón Garcia's orbit in terms of his grooming, his manipulation, his coercion on his part and others to silence those around him and to convince them and coerce them into helping with his own agenda and that of others in the organization committing crimes.
And Sochil Martin, let me ask you, for many people, it's hard to understand why young people would go along with this. Why do they?
They go along with it because they think it's a blessing. They don't doubt that the servant of God is lying to them or that he's committing a crime against them. That's the last thing in your mind. You're not even allowed, your mind's not allowed to go there. So they do it because they think it's the right thing to do and you're pleasing him and it's a blessing. He would tell us you have a crown in the sky, and in that crown that Sochil has, or you know, Alondra has, or any other of these women, even the Jane Does, any crown that you have in the sky, every time you do something for me, you have a little pearl or a diamond that you're working for to get that pearl or diamond or that precious gem on that crown. So you're working for those blessings, for the afterlife, and someday hope that, you know, everything that you did here on earth, you know, God will repay you one day in heaven. That's all I can say.
And how do you feel now that the wheels of justice are continuing to turn towards a trial for the apostle?
I'm happy because I think that we can just expect good news and we can expect this to keep moving forward, and the truth is there, and justice is there, and I think that there's just so much evil and there's so much harm that's been done for so many years that I think that it was time. It was time.
Well, Sochil Martin and Deborah Mallgrave, thank you both for joining us this evening and continuing to give us insights into this strange world of the apostle.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
A spokesman for the Light of the World Church continues to insist the apostle is innocent of all the charges against him. Up next, could this be the scariest Halloween ever? When we come back, lessons learned and not learned from 1918. You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network. We're joined now by Dr. J. Alex Navarro from the Center for the History of Medicine at the University of Michigan. And Alex, thank you so much for joining us. As they say, COVID-19 will be uglier the second time around.
That's what they're saying. I think many of us could have predicted this, unfortunately. And it was the case in 1918 to some extent in a lot of cities that issued closure orders and the types of gathering bans that we saw earlier in the spring and early summer. When they lifted them, people went back to life as normal. And in a great many cities, that second spike of cases was just as bad, if not worse, than the first go around.
We're about to have two major events in this country, the elections and Halloween. How were those handled in 1918?
So generally, we have to talk about the different regions, and they were handled differently depending on where in the country you were in 1918. In the Northeast, the epidemic was over quicker because a lot of people got sick very quickly. They had short and steep epidemic curves. And so for them, Halloween generally went on as usual, and the election was handled as usual. For cities in places in the Midwest and the West, it was a little bit different. If you had public gathering bans, many of those cities admonished their citizens to not let the kids go out for Halloween. And keep in mind, Halloween in 1918 was drastically different than it is today. It wasn't really about trick-or-treating. It was more about the tricks. Kids went out, usually young boys went out and caused a great deal of vandalism. And you had lots of police officers telling kids, you know, don't go out and destroy things because we have a lot of people who are convalescing from illness and can't go and repair the damage. In terms of the elections, places, for example, in California had a shortage of poll workers, either due directly to illness or people who were scared of working at the polls. And so they had to, sometimes at the very last minute, recruit people to work the polls. Places in Utah, for example, held elections in outdoor tents. So they create polling places outdoors. They realized that was a little bit safer. There were rumors in North Dakota, for example, that the election might be postponed, and officials had to say, no, in fact, the election is going on as usual.
So based on the history of what happened, what do you think is the best course of action for this Halloween, this election?
Well, I think we need to listen to public health officials who are telling us that, you know, gatherings, and as we see now, a great number of states are seeing a dramatic increase in case counts. You know, even small gatherings are problematic, and certainly, so having Halloween parties, I think, is really out of the question. And I think even going door to door, although there might be ways to do that could be relatively safe, I think it's a risk factor. You know, I would admonish people to listen to public health officers and to really maybe cancel the traditional Halloween that we usually see.
And as for the election, it's not going to be canceled. Lots of people are now voting early to avoid the crush on election day.
Yeah, you know, I think in general, though, there have been some issues in various states. You know, states have realized that the gathering for election day in the midst of a pandemic is not good. And so they've expanded the options for absentee voting or early voting. You know, we have seen some crowds formed in some states that have opened up early voting. But at least from what I've seen, people are wearing masks and they're trying to maintain a social distance. And they're outdoors. So I think so far, it seems to be pretty safe. I'm not an epidemiologist, but I'm heartened to see what I have been seeing.
The research shows that in 1918, the 3 months of autumn were really perhaps the cruelest months. Can we expect the same thing here now?
You know, it's possible, and certainly that's what some public health officials have been warning us about. You know, influenza is a different virus than coronavirus, and so it behaves a little bit differently. And so the timing may not be exact, but you know, we have seen that indoor gatherings are hugely problematic. And as the weather starts to cool off, as we head into the fall, into the winter, the great fear is that people are going to return to gathering indoors as opposed to outdoors. And we know that is a much higher risk factor for spreading COVID. And so, yes, I do think we are in for a pretty bad fall.
And we see so many parallels between the pandemic this year and what happened in 1918, almost more than 100 years ago, with the early outbreak in spring and then a sense over the summer, maybe we're past it. And now again, we're facing a resurgence. It's a kind of a W recovery, right? Down, up, down, up.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think you can, you know, we're really experiencing now nationally a third peak, a third surge of cases. We never really got a good handle on the national case counts to begin with, and what we've seen is that it just shifted to different regions of the country. It started, you know, with New York, for example, being a major hotspot in the metropolitan area, New Jersey, and Michigan, and then now it's moving into other places. You know, the South was hit, and now into the upper Midwest. We're really playing whack-a-mole with where this coronavirus is causing outbreaks. And I think we need to get a national handle on it.
In 1918, were there major national public figures, like President Trump has done this time, that have sort of cast aspersions on the seriousness of this and suggesting everyone recovers, it's going to disappear?
Yes and no, not at the national level. This in 1918, it was before the CDC was created, for example, in 1946. And the federal response was really quite limited to mostly the military camps where there was an early outbreak pretty much across the nation. And of course, this was a time of World War I and troop mobilization. At the local level, there were a great number of local health officers who at least initially said, influenza is going to be a problem. It will come in and it will blow in and out pretty quickly. That's at least what they thought initially, based on their previous experience with influenza epidemics, including one in 1889, 1890. They realized within usually a matter of a week or so, as the case counts skyrocketed and then deaths followed immediately after, that this was an entirely different beast they were dealing with. And that's when they started to tell people, we need to take this seriously. You need to avoid crowds. They implemented school closures and gathering bans and some business closures.
Is it troubling to you as a historian and as somebody who knows about medicine that we really haven't learned many lessons from 1918?
It's very troubling, especially when now, post New Deal, we have a sense that the federal government needs to take a stronger role in national crises, and we haven't really seen that. We see that just like in 1918, lots of people want to get back to normal life before it's safe to do so. We see lots of pushback, both at the personal level as well as the political level that we saw in 1918. The big difference is that pushback is now highly politicized. That was not the case in 1918. So in some ways, I think not only have we not learned the lessons of 1918, we've done a worse job considering that we should be much better prepared to handle a big pandemic like the COVID-19 one.
J. Alex Navarro from the Center for the History of Medicine at the University of Michigan, thank you so much again for joining us this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan Mclaughlin, editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams media empire. And Aidan, your first winner this week, Savannah Guthrie of NBC News, who went toe-to-toe in a town hall last week with President Trump.
This week, you retweeted to your 87 million followers a conspiracy theory that Joe Biden orchestrated to have SEAL Team 6, the Navy SEAL Team 6, killed to cover up the fake death of bin Laden. Now, why would you send a lie like that to your followers? You retweeted
That was a retweet. That was an opinion of somebody, and that was a retweet. I'll put it out there. People can decide for themselves.
You're
I don't
the
take a
president.
position.
You're not like someone's crazy uncle who can just retweet whatever.
That was a retweet.
She did a great job, Aidan. Not someone's crazy uncle, right?
Yeah, so there was a huge amount of pressure, as you know, on Savannah Guthrie last week to really put on a good show and actually interview Trump in a way that was successful because there was so much criticism of NBC for scheduling their town hall with Trump at the same time as ABC was having a town hall with Joe Biden after Trump had pulled out of the virtual second debate. So there was an enormous amount of criticism of NBC. There was a lot of pressure on Savannah Guthrie to do a good job as moderator of this town hall. And I think she did a really spectacular job. She questioned Trump on things that were, that are serious questions for the president. His supporters were sort of angry at the questions that she asked. They thought they were too harsh. I think if the president is retweeting conspiracy theories that bin Laden wasn't actually killed by a Navy SEAL raid and that there was a sort of conspiracy theory at the top levels of government that Joe Biden and Barack Obama sort of killed a body double, that's something that a moderator should ask a president about. She also asked him about QAnon, this sort of crazy conspiracy theory that there's a sort of satanic cult that Trump is fighting back against that's comprised of top Democrats. That's, again, is something that the president should be asked about. And she did a really good job of asking these questions, following up. She did something that I've noticed a lot of other interviewers that have been successful in questioning the president have done, which is treating the crazy stuff that the president says as crazy. Jonathan Swan of Axios is really good at that. So is Chris Wallace of Fox News. To a certain extent, I think you can't really question the president like you would any other politician, because there's a lot of stuff that he says that's really nuts. And you have to, at a certain point, treat it as nuts, like she did when she said, you're not America's crazy uncle.
And I think that one phrase really kind of put together the whole thing. We got it. This week's media loser, one of the White House's top medical advisors, Dr. Scott Atlas.
Yeah, so Dr. Anthony Fauci is probably the most well-known coronavirus task force member who's advising the president on the pandemic. I would say the most influential is certainly not Dr. Fauci, because the president is currently having a kind of a public spat with him. It's this other doctor named Scott Atlas, who is not an infectious disease expert. He's actually a radiologist. But he appeared on Fox News a lot and questioned a lot of what the administration scientists were saying about lockdowns and masks. Trump really liked him, so he invited him to serve as an advisor on the coronavirus task force. Now, he's had a really rough week. There was a report out in the Washington today that Deborah Birx, who's another member of the coronavirus task force, asked Mike Pence to get rid of Scott Atlas because she believes that he's feeding bad information to President Donald Trump. He was on Twitter questioning, saying that masks don't work, which flies in the face of the administration's own guidelines, the CDC's own guidelines. So he's really an outlier on the task force. A lot of infectious disease experts disagree vehemently with all of his policy prescriptions, and he's advising the president. So it's a really, it's a problem for the coronavirus task force that this person is on it. And I think it's going to continue to sort of make sure that the American response to the crisis is completely inconsistent.
Absolutely. Well, Aidan Mclaughlin, thank you so much once again for this week's winners and losers in the media, as always. And thanks to all of you for watching. And thanks to our great team at Law&Crime for getting us on the air and for getting us off the air successfully.